Hello, everyone. Let me see if it is working. If anybody could comment, please, just to see if we are okay. Let's see. Boa tarde, todo mundo. Alguém está conseguindo ver a gente? Let me see if it's working. Okay. 1 second. I can't read the comments. I'm trying to open by the cell phone. Let us see if it's working. Yeah, I can see them now. They are all here, Professor Steinberg.
Great. It's good to be here with you. Thank you.
Can you listen? Can you read all the comments?
I just saw one pop up. That was the first one that I saw. So I would say if
many people here.
Well, when they come up, if you want to read them to me, so I don't try to open up too many screens at the same time.
Of course. They are all just saying hi, good afternoon. We have many dear people here. We have Professor Heloísa Helena Barbosa, which is one of the greatest law professors here in Brazil. She's a great reference for all of us. So, Professor, all my love to you. We are so happy to have you here with us as well. So let us begin. Professor Steinberg, it is so wonderful to have you here with us. I'm pretty sure that even though you're not physically here with us, we are all together in thoughts.
We are. It's so great to be here with you. Thank you for having me and getting to give me this opportunity to speak with you.
We were all looking forward to talking to you, and we are really glad that you could make it. We know these days of COVID-19 pandemic have been crazy for everyone.
They have. It's been a really difficult time, and this is actually one of the first days that I'm actually back in my office. I've been working from home, like I'm sure many of you are, as we try to get through this difficult time with our families and with our loved ones. It's very hard.
Hope everything is all right with you and your loved ones.
It is, and I hope the same to you as well.
Yes. If that's not a problem, I'd like to say just a few words in Portuguese, just to greet our students and tell them a little bit about your bio, for those who don't know you yet. And even though I'm pretty sure that all my students know you because I always recommend you.
Oh,
so if you don't mind,
so much.
I would just like to start. Então, gente, é uma alegria muito grande, imensa para mim receber aqui hoje a professora Stacey Steinberg, do Levin College of Law, da Universidade da Flórida. A professora Stacey, ela é diretora do Gator Teen Child Clinic, Master Legal Skills Professor e diretora associada do Center on Children and Families. Além de tudo isso, ela também é autora do livro Growing Up Shared, How Parents Can Share Smarter on Social Media and What You Can Do to Keep Up with Your Family Safe, No Privacy World. E, além disso, ela é uma das maiores autoridades do mundo quando o assunto é sharenting. Então, o nosso tema de hoje é Sharenting, a privacidade infantil na era das mídias sociais. E como que vai ser essa nossa conversa? A professora Stacey vai fazer uma pequena apresentação inicial de 15 a 20 minutos, depois nós vamos abrir para perguntas e respostas no bate-papo. Eu já recebi várias perguntas ao longo dessa semana, então, se vocês tiverem mais perguntas, é só comentar aqui no chat, de preferência em inglês. Tudo bem? Ok.
Sounds good to me.
I was just telling them how our conversation will work. We'll start with your presentation. So please feel free to spend as much time as you'd like. And then we will move to questions and answers, which the students have been sending since last week when I announced this event. I was also telling everybody how famous you are. So I know your mom is watching. So I'd like to say how famous you are here in Brazil. Everybody in our legal doctrine quotes you all the time. Every news report about sharenting quotes your published writings, your works. So we are really happy to have you here with us tonight.
Well, you're making me blush. It's really great to be here. You know, I got into this topic because it was so close to my heart and so much affecting my daily life as a mom and as a photographer. My background is that I started as a prosecutor when I first graduated law school. I graduated law school and I became a special victims unit prosecutor, which meant that I prosecuted crimes against children, against families, and domestic violence cases. And I did that for a number of years. And I then left the prosecutor's office. I became a mom, and eventually I found myself at the University of Florida teaching. At the same time, I had my second child, and I realized that I loved to take pictures. I was taking pictures of my children every chance I got. I started a blog for one of them. And then before I knew it, I had friends and family asking me to take pictures of their kids. And so I did that, and I shared those pictures. And then at some point, probably around 2014, 2015, I had just become somebody who was able to write for the Washington Post, and I was writing about motherhood. And I started to wonder if there was a conflict between my desire to tell my story as a mother and my children's right to have privacy and to be able to control their digital footprint. And so I wondered, was there a better way for me to be able to go forward and keep sharing, connecting with people, but also be protective of my children's digital footprint so that when they became adults, they had the opportunity to define themselves online in their own terms. And so that's where this started. It started as a 800-word short essay saying, hey, I think I need to think about this. And before I knew it, I realized that no one else was studying sharenting from a legal perspective. And there were very few people studying sharenting from any perspective at all. So I found myself in a position where I could do some research and maybe put something out into the world that could be helpful to others. And I like to say when I talk to students that I started this work from a place where, as a lawyer, I was a litigator. I talked to juries, I argued in the court, but I wouldn't say I was really a writer when I started to research this. I enjoyed writing, but I wasn't an academic writer when I was in college. And so writing my article about sharenting was actually my first academic paper that I ever wrote. And I say that because it was really scary. It was really hard to know how to write an academic paper, how to make sure I did the right legal analysis and the right citations. And that's it. Yep. That's the paper. And I was fortunate. I had many professors guide me and mentor me. And the next thing I knew, I had felt like I had done a good job exploring the First Amendment issues and free speech issues and the child's right to privacy. And this was the first academic piece that I wrote about sharenting, was in the Emory Law Journal. And that piece then led to some collaborative work that I did with a pediatrician, and we were able to present our research to the American Academy of Pediatrics to talk about how pediatricians really had a role to play also in helping parents. I started this work thinking that I would never share on social media again, but I actually walked away still sharing because my research really showed me that there is so much good that comes from connection. And it's ironic that my book is coming out at a time when COVID-19 is happening. And really, social media is one of the only ways that we have to stay connected with our friends and family. And so that's really been something kind of interesting to me. And it's made me even think about that positive role in my work as well, and what we do as sharing our story. So I will start by saying that when I look at this issue, it's really an issue where we look at the fact that in the United States, I believe in your country, in many countries, parents have the right to control the upbringing of their kids. And that is a fundamental principle in society, that parents decide how to educate them often, what religion, how to discipline, how to feed. And of course, those things are limited in some ways by the state in different ways. And so parents have a right to control the upbringing of their kids, but the state also has a role in protecting kids if parents go too far or do something that the society or the laws have deemed inappropriate. The third piece is that kids have either an interest in privacy or maybe even a right to privacy. And that is a distinction that is really important here in the United States and probably around the world, whether or not kids have a moral interest or a moral right to control their footprint, or whether they have a legal right to control their footprint. There's very few pieces of, there's very little scholarship that talks about privacy in the context of family life. So we know that if a school wants to take pictures of a child, or a police officer wants to search a child's room, or a medical center wants to use a child's information, that they have to get the permission of the parents. And so we have family privacy, but that usually involves child mom and dad, or child mom,
Same
child
here.
dad, right?
Just to let you know, the same here.
The same. Okay, yeah, so the same thing. So, but what happens when the parent's interest and the child's interest diverge? And I call that the role of the parent is usually the gatekeeper, the person who's keeping the gate private to keep the child's private life private. But in the role of sharenting, parents are not only the gatekeeper, but they're also the gate opener. They're the ones deciding what information flows out from the family unit. And a lot of times, parents have an interest in getting that information out, whether it's a financial interest, a personal interest, lots of different reasons, a career interest. And so looking at what that interest is really where I've put a lot of my work. And so when I started this work, I kind of assumed that any interest was not good because it was intruding on a child's footprint. But what I've really found is that there are valid, very, very valid interests that a parent might have in sharing a child's story. So when we think about sharing, we have to kind of put parameters around what is appropriate to share and what's not appropriate to share. And there are some general guidelines that parents have recognized that are good ideas. And even since I started this work, I think parents have really thought deeper about this. But I always say I'm not here to tell parents what to do. Instead, I'm here to give parents information, because well-informed parents are best suited to make good decisions for their kids. Most parents want to protect their kids. Most parents want to support their kids. But this is such a new issue. I mean, our kids are the first generation to grow up shared, but we're also the first generation of parents to try to figure out what it means to raise kids alongside social media. So in my book and in my research, and I hope with the questions that you asked me today, what we could do is we can talk a little bit about what some of those risks are and how we can put them in perspective with the joys that can come from interacting with people on social media. So I'll let you, I have more I could tell, but I'd like to have a conversation. So why don't you ask me some questions and I will share as we go.
I must confess that I had previously watched one of your videos on YouTube, but I have to say it's much more incredible to watch you live. I love something that you wrote. Should parents control the narratives of their kids' life? Are they allowed to write the stories online and their footprints? Who owns that right to write that story? That's something that always has intrigued me. As I have told you on the emails, sharing hasn't been a thing for us here in Brazil until last year. I can point out that we Brazilians tend to focus too much on digital influencers and their kids. But as you usually say so accurately, sharenting isn't just about famous people. The harms of sharenting may come also from ordinary people who disclose their kids' data and images. So that's one of the things that I'd like to ask you. What do you think about this? Do you feel a difference between kids that their parents are digital influencers, or do you think? I mean, what do you think about that?
So I think that in some ways, all parents are digital influencers. We're all kind of influencing how society sees us as a family unit. It might be for 200 friends, or it might be for a larger audience. I think we always have to kind of treat it with a higher level of scrutiny when the parent is profiting off of the information that's being shared. And when we think about laws generally, we as a society have recognized that, like, if a child is a child actor, that the child has certain protections, that money can be kept in certain separate accounts for when the child gets older. We haven't really translated that to internet stardom. So I think that it is certainly a bigger concern when it's a celebrity and the audience is bigger, because the potential for that digital footprint to really outlive childhood is just so much greater. One of the things that one of my mentors said to me that I thought was really astounding and stuck with me through my work is that it's not only important for us to think about the right of a child to not have negative information or embarrassing information put out there online, but we also need to think about, does a child have a right to have no information, whether negative or positive, put out there in the digital world? And when I answer that question as a mom, I see the benefit to that, but just like so many other things with parenting, I see the benefit to them not having a digital footprint, but I also see the benefit to our family interacting with people online. And so just like we decide whether to let our babies cry it out or whether to, introduce solid foods at 6 months or 12 months or timeout or no timeout, every family is going to do it a little bit differently, and that's okay. I think there's just a real craving for the information and for folks like you and your students to do this work and to research this, because in order to have a good conversation, we have to have good data and we have to have good research. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more with you. Something that shocks me is that children get a fame that is not entailed to them. It's the fame for their parents are famous when they are digital influencers, but they kind of make the children famous by consequence. Mm-hmm. It happens that fame, they grew up famous. I always talk about WhatsApp stickers. I don't know if that's a thing there in the US, but here in Brazil we use WhatsApp really much, and we all have children stickers. They are sons and daughters of digital influencers.
Wow!
So their image is everywhere. In every conversation, people are using their stickers.
We have something similar. We don't. I know, there are a lot of folks who do use WhatsApp, but it's not something that I use. When we have a hurricane coming, we all rush to get WhatsApp on our phone, but on a regular basis, we don't use it very much.
Hope you don't use WhatsApp.
But I know what you mean. We have a lot of memes here, and there are certain kids who have become the subject of memes. And one of the things that I explored in my book is this idea that when it's not your child or your niece or your nephew or a child you actually know, you almost dehumanize the child. You almost forget that it's a real child. And there have been some articles that have come out that have kind of tracked down the kids who were the subject of those memes to see how did they feel about that internet stardom. And, I couldn't break it down in a percentage, but a good percentage of them were not so happy about it. And sometimes it's things that seem really benign. Here in Gainesville, Florida, when things just were starting to go viral, I guess about 10, 12 years ago, there was a boy who went to the dentist. And after he went to the dentist, he was, on the drugs that they gave him to pull out his tooth or whatever. And so he was really loopy. And the dad does an interview with the boy, and he was wearing a Florida Gator shirt, and the University of Florida is the Florida Gators. And so it was kind of popular in our town because there was a little bit of our local town involved in it, and it was shared so many times. Well, this year, that boy is now a freshman at our college, at our university, and it's, before he got here, the local newspaper had already said that he was coming. So I think that that's a really great point. And it's not only about the notoriety and the how the child might feel about it, but I also worry about things like people stealing the images and using them for nefarious purposes. An area that, if your students are looking for research projects that I think is really underexplored is how pornography is now becoming these deep fake images. And
I wrote about this.
Yeah, it's I was asked to talk about it at a symposium, and I was surprised that they asked me because I thought there would be other people who were doing that work, and turns out I was the first to do it. There was no one else that was researching. I mean, maybe not the first, but I was one of the few people that were looking at it from the child's perspective. There are a lot of amazing law professors who are looking at the deep fake issues from adult perspectives and from revenge pornography and things like that. That happens. There's incredible people that are exploring it from that angle, but there are fewer people exploring it from the child's angle. So much so that in like our state in Florida, our laws haven't been updated to make morphed images, morphed child pornography a criminal offense. And so there's a lot of work to be done with that.
Well, that really rings a bell for us here in Brazil. We're talking about this, especially about politics, deepfake with regards to politics. That's something that we've already read a lot about. In our last polls, we had a case with the governor of São Paulo, João Dória. He was involved in a scandal, but they concluded that it was a deepfake of him surrounded with women. So that was a thing for us. But just as in the US, here we don't talk about child and deepfakes, and that's really something that all the students who are listening to us should dig up a little bit more.
They should, and I feel like I really, there's so much that I need to learn to be able to do that research, but it's so critical that we all attack it from different angles and that countries collaborate. This field of sharenting is so small that some of my greatest colleagues are in other countries. You know, the other folks that are studying this, that are looking at it as deeply, are all over the world. And it's really important that we work on this and we think about it, not just country to country, each one doing it differently, but that we all pool our resources and pool the information that we're gathering to make these decisions. I also think that as these images come up, there's a case that we have here, the Cytus case. Did you read about the Cytus case? It was a child prodigy who was like the equivalent of the meme in the 1920s. You know, he was super popular. He was really smart, and his parents put him on display, and the newspapers all ran, you know, art stories about him. Well, he grew up and he wanted to be private. He wanted to live a quiet life, and he sued one of the big papers here, the New Yorker, that sued them and said, you don't have a right to, you know, take these pictures of me and write all these things. And the court said, once a celebrity, always a celebrity. And it's like, wow, if he's once a celebrity, always a celebrity, what about the kid who's upstairs gaming on his Xbox and he has his brother featured on the videos and they go viral? Is his brother now always a celebrity? Like, how far does this go?
Well, that is an incredible case. I read your text, and also on the YouTube speech you gave, you also mentioned that case. It's a very nice case for us to realize how shocking it is, because once you are exposed, you're exposed forever. What is that? Another case that we have seen in Brazil involves something that you have described so brightly: videos who end up being used by pedophiles. We have heard about a case here of a kid who posted a video on YouTube, and in that video she was playing with another friend in the beach, and they were both wearing bikinis. And the mom was surprised to see that the video had millions of views, because the YouTube algorithm recommended it to pedophiles, because they had that profile, that people who seek that kind of video, and they were led to this video. So that brings us a very important topic. Should platforms act to prevent sharenting? Do you think that platforms have a role there?
I think that they could have a role there. And the ways that I've heard it described is that perhaps platforms could have some sort of a warning box that pops up to kind of share information with parents about what the risks are, and then make sure the parent really wants to share. The example you gave is something that I've heard about, individual stories like that too, and it's been hard to collect data, but the Australian eSafety Commissioner had reported that 50% of all images on pedophile image sharing sites, and we're not talking about child pornography images, but images that child pedophiles were sharing, 50% had come from family websites and blogs. And that's really scary because, you know, you and I have spent a lot of time doing this research, so we're unfortunately aware of these risks. But a lot of people would just be shocked that kids playing at the beach could be nefarious. And so I don't think parents should necessarily stop sharing every picture of their child that they want to share, you know, but I think that parents just need to know that is a risk. Just like, we know to lock our car because we know whether or not there's a chance someone's going to break into it. We make decisions all the time, and it's just important that parents have the information to do it, because it is something that I think the websites could help with. And then Professor Fox and Professor Hoy are two communication scholars here in the States who have really encouraged marketers to take a bigger role in not collecting information and not encouraging families to share information about kids. So the platforms might have a role, but also the people who try to market to kids or market to adults to get adults to share information, personal identifiable information. Maybe they have a role to play in being more responsible. And maybe the laws should focus on the companies and like the website operators like you spoke about, instead of making the laws focused on what the parents are doing, creating a better system of support for parents.
That's wonderful. One of the questions that people have asked me too much is about how would you define sharenting? But that's because to be a sharenter, do you need the too much aspect, or a parent who shares 2 pictures per month is also a sharenter? This has been discussed here in Brazil since the Collins Dictionary, even though it's not a legal dictionary. It says that that sharenting would be the habitual use of social media to share news, images, etc. of one's child. So do we need that too much to be a sharenter, or?
Yeah, the word sharenting, I have gone back and forth with. When I wrote my book, for example, there was a encouragement to maybe have sharenting as part of the title, and I chose not to use the title of sharenting because I think that there is a negative connotation that goes along with the word and the phrase. And so the deeper I've gotten into this work, the further I've gotten from the word sharenting. It's certainly the buzzword, and it's like on my Twitter profile, I go back and forth with including it and not including it. And if any of your students are on Twitter, I'm at SG Steinberg. So you can see what I'm talking about. But sometimes I say #sharenting and sometimes I don't. And it's because I don't know. I think that when we say sharenting and we use it in a way that everyone's a sharenter, it's not such a good idea. So maybe the word sharenting should be reserved for the parents who are over-sharenting, so to speak.
Wow, that's something really amazing, because we all have the same doubt here in Brazil, but we don't have this problem because in language, linguistically speaking, we don't have that problem because we have we could say oversharing parents here in Brazil. There is a word for that here. We could use that.
Oh.
Superexposição, overexposure. We have this overexposure, superexposição. So we always say this, a superexposição de crianças, the overexposed of child. That's something for us. It's great to hear you.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you have a separate word for it. I feel like we don't really have, we haven't even developed the language yet to describe the severity of the issue and the way that we need to talk about it.
We have also seen in Brazil many cases of digital influencers who share their kids online all the time. As you say in your book, it's a no privacy world. Even before these kids are born, they are online. Some even broadcast labor. Mm-hmm. We've had this here, labor being broadcast. Especially during...
Yeah, oh, go on. It's hard. It's because there's beauty in that experience, right? And I have a dear cousin who once said to me, it's the experience of motherhood that she wants to share. It's not her child's story. It's the universal experience of being a parent. And so are there ways that we can shift what we're sharing to be that universal experience? How do we separate our experience from their experience? And then the same researcher who suggested to me that we need to think about kids might not know digital footprint at all also said, but we also need to consider maybe as parents, our role is to create a positive digital footprint so that when they do become 18, 19 and they post some things that aren't so appropriate, well, maybe those great posts about them getting into the National Honor Society will even out their profile, right? So that's another example of it. It's the beginning of the conversation and figuring out. I can tell you where I've kind of settled with this is that I think that one of the greatest places that we can improve is by thinking about our social media accounts as family accounts as opposed to as mom's account. Because in the United States, kids get accounts usually for social media. They're legally allowed to have them when they become 13 years old. And that's also the same age that our protections for children go away. We have the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and at 13, those protections are no longer available to kids. And so if we were able to think of our accounts as family accounts, we can teach our kids how to use social media appropriately while they're still interested in holding our hand, you know, still being young enough to want to be shared in a picture with us.
Especially during this pandemic, we have seen an increase of that practice. And as much as many parents are now working from home, in home offices, and they have been spending more time with their kids. As I've written in one paper, the virus has exposed the overexposure.
It has exposed the overexposure. It's true. And it's also exposed the positives of social media as well.
Exactly.
It has exposed how I think in our boredom, it's more and more tempting to post something, to have interactions with people. We're also isolated. So some of the more embarrassing things about our families or our kids, we're tempted to share because we don't have our friend meeting us for lunch to talk about this potty training issue or, you know, whatever the embarrassing issue is. So we're more likely to share more because research says that parents do benefit from sharing online. So we're in kind of this catch-22, you know, where we're benefiting more, but we're risking more at the same time.
Exactly. So I have a couple more questions for you. This conversation has been wonderful. Could the state intervene? Because here in courts, what usually happens is that people get divorced, and during the judicial battle, one of the parents asks the judge to limit the exposure of the kid by the other parent online. I mean, when they are married and happy, there's no problem with the exposure. Now that they have broken up, they turn themselves against Sharenting. The problem is, if parents don't disagree, the exposure will go on. So can public authorities act against this like we have seen in the case we were talking about, the Save Bell for Girls, Salvem Bell para Meninas? Or should they act only in extreme cases? It is definitely hard for a judge to rule something, oh, you are only allowed to share 2 pictures per month. How do you feel about that? I know that you suggest a public health model, which is amazing, but I really would like to hear from you about that.
So I hope I won't be too boring because I love to talk about this, okay? And so cut me off, okay? And I'll start with the United States is really unique because our First Amendment protections are really strong here. And so when I talk about it, like think about how it might apply with your laws, and we can talk about kind of the comparative nature of it. So for us, a court is not going to be able to limit what a parent shares in almost all circumstances proactively. So we call that a prior restraint on speech. So if a parent wants to say to the other parent, you can't post more than 1 picture of our child, you know, a week, or you can't post embarrassing things about our child. If the court were to order the parent not to do that, then the court would be restraining that person's speech before that speech was made, a prior restraint on speech. And we have a really, we have a negative look on that here in the States. Now, in Europe, I know that they're more reasonable to make prior restraints on speech because here in the United States, we value speech very highly, whereas many other countries put a higher emphasis on privacy. And if you put a higher emphasis on privacy, then you can create a prior restraint on speech because the interest of protecting someone's privacy is seen as the higher interest. That said, there have been some really interesting cases in the context of family separation and divorce. And I've really enjoyed reading them and was looking at one. There was one in Massachusetts, for example. I believe there were 2 that came out really quickly. So I won't say where each one is from. But one of them involved parents that had been were separating, and the mom was upset with what the dad had been posting. And they went to court, and the court said, you know, basically, no, I'm not going to control what the dad is posting. And when the court talked about it, the court said something that has been on my mind quite a bit, kind of with that whole public health model. if the parents separate and come up with a parenting plan that says, we're not going to post naked pictures, we're not going to talk about our child's ADHD, we're not going to share report cards, whatever it might be, if the parents make an agreement when they separate, then 10 years later, when they disagree, the court has something that they can fall back on. Because if you restrain your own speech by contract, well, then the court can enforce that. Yeah. So one of the things that I've been really excited about is the idea that if we were to be able to teach these, to talk about sharenting, to talk about the risks, talk about the benefits, maybe we're not going to hit all the parents, but maybe if lawyers can know about this or mediators can know about this, almost many cases involving parents separating result in a parenting plan where the parents make certain agreements. And if the mediators could have a list of best practices in the room while they help the parents mediate, perhaps the parents will come up with an agreement and then it can be enforceable by the court later. And so that's just one way that I think that, yes, the court can jump in. The other way that the court can jump in or possibly jump in is in the context of the right to be forgotten, which is a bigger deal, which is a more powerful tool for you than it is for us. Here, when I write about the right to be forgotten, I have to imagine a right to be forgotten. Whereas when you talk about the right to be forgotten, you really have a right to be forgotten, right? And so the idea that I have with the right to be forgotten is that when we share information as parents about our 2 and our 3 and our 4-year-olds, well, the privacy right of the child is much smaller than the parent's right and interest to share. But as the child gets older, the parent's interest in sharing that information gets smaller, the child's interest in privacy gets bigger. And so perhaps at a certain point, like the light bulb switches, it switches to focusing on the child. Now, if we look at the information that a parent shared as speech, we still have that free speech issue. But what a lot of countries do is they look at information shared online, not necessarily as speech, but as data. And if that information is data, then we're able to delete it better under different data protection type of policies. So I really love the right to be forgotten. I love the idea that it can break the link between someone and their name. For example, somebody that I know very well had a mother who shared something with their full name on it when they were a baby. And it was not a bad thing, but it was just a cute thing that was really cute for that mother and child when the child was a baby. But as he gets older, the first thing that comes up on his Google search result is that story, that adorable, healthy, nothing wrong with it story that he might not necessarily want to be the first thing that college recruits see when he goes to college. And so it would be really nice if you might not be able to get that article or that blog taken down, but if you could create a way that people could have Google basically break the connection between that name and that search result, I think you could have a really good way of protecting speech and also protecting privacy.
That index, breaking the index.
Yes, which you guys have so much more research on, but it's so interesting because I think it really might be one of the great answers to the conflict of sharenting.
I had planned to say that because here, unlike you, we don't have that problem because your First Amendment, it's so broader than our First Amendment, as the equivalent to your First Amendment here. We would call it freedom of expression.
Right.
We think that no right is weighs more in the balance previously in abstract. We think of the case, we rule the case, we see the case, we weigh the values in the case, and we decide which value prevails. So that's not a problem for us in advance. But what we have been seeing is that this is something so new to us that the first cases about sharenting are just starting to come out. As I told you, the first case that became notorious was that Save Bell for Girls. Mm-hmm. And the court had to intervene. The public ministry, the prosecutors here in Brazil, they acted. They said, this is too much. The child is being violated online. She's being over-embarrassed online. We have to step in and do something about it. But the other cases, judges simply do nothing. What are they going to do? So that's really something that we need to focus. The different sides of the story, how it happens there in your country, how it happens here, how our tools can help you, how your tools can help us. That thing you said about the difference in Europe, because in Europe you said that people use data, and what parents post online is data, and in the US it is speech, it is discourse. That's not a problem for us. It doesn't matter here if it is speech, if it's data. What means is we have the best interest of the child, right, and we have the child's privacy, and we have the freedom of expression, we have the parental authority, and we weigh them in the balance.
Yeah.
And we see,
and it's a balance for you, and I love that. I think that there could be cases here where it got to an extreme that the court was willing to do something. I can't name a specific case or example, but if a parent was estranged from a child and they were bullying the child online, I could imagine that there can be facts that could create the court to step in, but it would be such a higher level. It'd almost be like the abuse, abandonment, neglect kind of level that we have in our dependency system, to take away the parents' rights. And in Europe, they have been thinking about this. You said that this is kind of a new issue for you all. It's a couple of years for us. In Europe, I feel like they've been thinking about it for so much longer. And even when I was just getting started, France had already created laws that would protect kids' privacy and had fines for parents. It wasn't specifically talking about it didn't say like a parent will be fined for doing X, but it had already been conceptualized. There was a law identified that somebody could use to sue a parent for oversharing. And so Europe really seemed to be ahead, and Australia really was ahead with this. And then, some other countries are just taking longer. I think we have to have these conversations first, and then out of the conversations come the law. And so it's a process.
We have signed the UN's convention.
You haven't signed. We have not.
Yeah.
You're ahead of us already.
Yeah. On that we are already ahead.
Yeah.
But we also have in our constitution. So we didn't even need the UN's convention.
Right.
So that was not a thing for us. We have legal tools to handle it. I feel that way. We don't have the information. The doctrine is not is still to look that up better. Mm-hmm. But we have the legal tools.
That's really nice. So you have the tools to use. You just need the public awareness to catch up and the knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly. Have you ever thought about how this could work in an international agenda? Because many Sharenters are famous in many countries. Yeah. Like I said, the WhatsApp stickers, they flow all over the world. Do you think that could be an agenda for this, internationally speaking?
I do. I don't feel like I have enough expertise to think about how it would work, but absolutely. I mean, I think that to think about it out loud, it's almost like if it crossed that border and it was happening in that country, then that country would have the authority to be able to prosecute that information that was shared on their territory or in their country. So if a parent shared something about a child and, if there was more child pornography, for example, for certain, if your country had laws that made that a crime and our country did not, and someone in your country had it, it doesn't matter that the picture originated here. It would be a crime. In our country, our federal laws would make more of child pornography a crime. Some state laws would, but we have, the dual jurisdiction. So we had a case in my own state where a morph child pornography image existed, and the state court ruled, I agree this is horrible. I agree that this should not be allowed, but until the Florida legislature changes the law, there's nothing I can do about it. Now, the prosecutor could have gone through the federal government, and the federal laws, which are much more stringent, would have made it a crime. So I feel like it's almost like you have, I don't know what you'd call it, but like you have a spotter, like you have another set of laws that is going to catch that if someone's creating the morphed images. But all of the laws can be, we're so behind. I mean, our Children's Online Privacy Protection Act was created in the 90s. I mean, no one envisioned Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, back then. And so that's why our 13-year-olds have no they're treated the same as adults in my country online in a lot of ways.
It is even hard to create to pass a bill because we have to take care not to create something that is so dated that it's so for this date for today, and maybe the technology will change, will evolve, and in 10 years we won't be talking about Facebook or whatever.
We'll be talking about something different. And so when we talk to parents about the risks and we talk about what they need to think about, why they shouldn't post this or why this, sharing a date of birth might be a bad idea, we have to also think about what will the technology be able to do 20 years from now. So we know facial recognition technology is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. How will that be used in the future is not something we can really predict. I use DNA, the DNA kits that people buy over the counter now and to test their DNA. 20 years ago, there were family secrets that were kept because they didn't think that these secrets would get out. And now we have DNA and these secrets do get out. We have a podcast by Dani Shapiro called Family Secrets. And she wrote a book about this whole idea that, nothing really stays a secret anymore. And in the same ways, nothing, what we share online, can it ever really stay private anymore either?
I have one question here for you, sent by a bright student, Tamini Teixeira. She asked about France. You were talking about France, and I will read her question. She said, in France, parents that overshare information about their kids can go to jail and also pay a fine of 45,000 euros. In Italy and Austria, there are precedents convicting parents to delete photos of their children from social media. Do you think that law and decisions like that are the best way to deal with sharenting, or remove parental rights of those who abuse it would be a better way?
I think that's a great question. And it's something I grapple with quite a bit. And I think a lot of parents grapple with that, thinking about other parents. In my mind, I think that the law should regulate at the margins, that there are situations where the law needs to step in to protect kids. Absolutely. If we could create a system where the law regulates at the margins, gives parents a lot of latitude and a lot of information, and the law empowers kids to be able to take control of those footprints later on, I think that's really the way to make the best system. You create laws that put up side rails, you empower parents by giving them information, and then you empower kids to be able to control their footprints when they get older.
We have another question. I'll put this, Professor Heloísa Helena Barbosa. She is our head teacher at the Rio de Janeiro State University. She is, wow, I can't even describe this woman.
It's so great. Please, thank you for being here and listening to this. It's an honor for me to have you here.
Can you see her question?
I can, about the grandparents when we talk about sharenting. It's a great question. So there was actually a recent United States case involving grandparents and sharenting and thinking about what can grandparents share. And for the most part, parents have the right to completely, to control what's going on about their kids, but we really can't stop other people from being able, that there are sometimes, like if you shared a picture of my child, sometimes I would have a right to have you take it down and sometimes I wouldn't. But I think that in most contexts, the grandparent is treated just like a friend or even an acquaintance. The parent, when a friend or an acquaintance could be stopped, I think the grandparent also. But my book, I really focus on, it's not just for the parents. The grandparents really need to read it and really need to think about it too, because grandparents are sharing just as much as kids are, right? And it's really a conflict.
My grandma's watching us.
Oh, hi. Yes. Yeah, I think that, but in the same way that parents that are empowered will make better decisions, I think grandparents that are empowered will make better decisions. So it's kind of a team effort. But it does create a conflict when a grandparent wants to share and the parents don't. A lot of times we have, I think that as social media gets a little older, a lot of the newer parents are not putting any pictures of their kids online, and grandma really, really wants to share. And so it's very difficult. It could cause a lot of conflict. Or if, what about at a wedding or a big family event and there's a big group shot and there's one child in it that the grandmother really wants to share, or if, God forbid, somebody passes away and you make some sort of a video and you have one picture that has a child in it. And I would think that in most of those contexts that I just spoke about, it wouldn't really be a legal issue as much as a moral issue. Now, I don't know about how it would fall in other countries, but here, I think that those types of situations really are, again, probably best guided through a public health model. And I think grandparents do have to defer to the wishes of their kids, as hard as that is sometimes. Hi, Mom, hi, Dad. I'm sure you agree with me sometimes, but sometimes you don't. And you just have to, you get to be the mom and then you're the grandparent and you have a different role.
I couldn't agree more with you. I have another question here where we have many questions from Lucia Teixeira Ferreira. Can you read it?
I can, about the GDPR exemption.
Yes.
I think that's a great question. And you know what, I'm going to ask you to try to answer that question, because I don't feel that I am enough of an expert in that exemption to be able to really comment on it. But what I'd also do, if you don't want to, then let me get that question and get back to you. Maybe you can get the email address, and so I can do some research and talk via email with Lucia to be able to better answer the question after I've done some research. I do think that there is a role for the GDPR to play in protecting kids from sharenting. The extent of that role is not something that I feel like I know enough about to comment. But yes, I do think that it would apply. And there is a case that I recently wrote about. I think it's in the London School of Economics, an essay I wrote there that I think talks through that case and how it plays out. But I can get that for you.
Here in Brazil, we have our equivalent to the GDPR. It's our law here. It's not valid yet. It is still it's still on the vacatio legis. I don't know if you say this in the US. Vacatio legis, Latin word, is still on the go. But we have this discussion here in Brazil because some people say that our law hasn't been as protective as it should be for the kids, and it doesn't mention sharenting or anything quite like that.
Yeah, and listen, it now came to me, the case. There is a case just like what you're talking about in that, and the grandparent was ordered to take down the pictures in Europe because the parent didn't want them up. So yes, it would protect them under exactly the way you had described it. And the parents, the court ordered the parent to take the pictures down and said that for every day after the order was entered that the picture stayed up, that the grandparent would pay a fine. So it was really interesting to us because that would play out very differently on, where I live. So, but great question. And I think that's where the future is with sharenting, is looking at that exemption, looking at how we look at privacy and how we compare it to speech.
We have another question from Ana Clara Landim.
Yeah, what happens with the money the parents make by exposing children online or advertisements on Instagram? Should it be kept for the children? There's a big argument to be made that it should. There are many laws that are in place here in the States, and I'm sure by you, that if a child is a child actor or actress, that some of that money has to be kept in trust for the child for when the child becomes an adult. And we don't have laws yet like that for online fame. So there's, I think that as the laws evolve, that would definitely be really smart and important. What gets kind of difficult, though, for me and interesting is, I'm very sensitive to parents who choose to share online because they have a real family-based interest, a parent-based interest versus a family-based interest. There are a lot of family-based interests in sharing very specific details. The example that comes to mind is a parent who has a sick child who has a blog and shares their story to raise money to help support the medical care, to help create an environment of support online for that child. I have a lot of friends who have done that, and I think that is a good thing. And there's difficult decisions to be made, but parents need to make those choices. And so for those kinds of cases, yes, the parent might be making money, but I think that the parent is making money to help the family, which is very different than those cases where parents create, a YouTube channel, just as family income and, document, things that.
a discussion here in Brazil, I have even written about that, is that when you have a child and it is a child, an actor, it's an actor, or it wants to go to the television to do some advertising, you have to ask a judge if you are on a carnival parade. I don't know if you have ever seen that. We have those carnival parades, and if the child wants to be there because it's broadcast, you have to ask a judge the permission for the child to be there. So I've been thinking about this. Do we need to ask a judge if a parent wants to post something online and make money out of it?
I don't think so.
To different times, a digital era.
Yeah, I think that I think it would be too big of a leap now. I think that we have to think through that, think about how that can still empower the parents. In our system, we have a term. What I do as a law professor is I represent kids in court, and I represent them in the role of attorney ad litem. And so the kids on my caseload are kids who have been removed from their home for abuse, abandonment, or neglect. And they have somebody who works in the role of a guardian ad litem that looks out for the best interest of the child. But what I do and what my students do is we speak directly for what the child wants. And so, sometimes I'll joke around, if a child wanted to go to live in Disney World and say they were, a Cinderella, that my job would be to go to court and say, Your Honor, she is Cinderella and she belongs in, Cinderella's castle. So, so it's an interesting thing to think about, like, should the judge look at best interest? Should the judge look at what the child wants? I think that there should be mechanisms for kids to be able to there should be mechanisms for kids to be able to come back to court, to be able to challenge things, especially as they get older. But to make the judge in a gatekeeper role, I'm not so sure that I would be in support of that. But I don't know. I'd have to think through it more.
What we see here in Brazil, it's a common practice here, is that many parents are digital influencers, and they share online things. They trade. People give them money, they give them clothes, experiences, and they show it online. But in order to do so, in order to be part of that routine, they broadcast their family.
Yeah.
The kid is part of her life. So when she's making her money, for her, she gets her kid just behind her, and the kid is exposed, even though the kid was not the aim of that advertising.
Right.
The kid is there. So that's something that happens here in Brazil quite a lot.
And I think we have to figure out, some sort of guardrails to protect about when that becomes the child's full life. When every moment is documented, we have a different situation than the child, showing up in the background. But I think that it's something we could also look at. How do the laws define, what rights do kids have when it comes to movies and acting, and try to model the rules that we would have when it comes to social media in similar ways. And also maybe put some of that burden again on the social media sharing sites, not just on the parents. In Europe, they have a show about it's like My Kindergartner's Life, or some sort of show where they feature little kids in like a reality TV show. And Professor Nottingham's been really researching, do kids really, how do you put a kid on display for a reality TV show? Is it enough to just get the parents' consent? Should the child be able to give consent? And how do those kids feel years later that their life was a reality TV show, right? And so it's happening a lot. And I think what's scarier to me than whether there's laws or not is that it hasn't become part of child rearing discourse for us to decide. Like, you and I have opinions about it, but there's so many people who haven't, just watch it on TV or see it on their newsfeed, and they haven't really taken a step back and thought about it. So it's almost like we need a pause button. We need a pause button to let all of the research, all of the technology catch up with us so that we can have more books and more research, and that, it's not a topic that, grandparents should be talking to their kids about it. In my book, I talk about how, when we become parents, we think about how our parents raised us. We think about what they did right and what they did wrong. We think about what we saw our friends' parents do or what we saw on television. And we use those experiences to model how we are going to parent as adults. but we don't have that base of knowledge. We don't know if it worked for us or not, because, you know, our parents were still showing pictures, you know, out of a photo album. So until we have more, we need to bring the kids into the discussion. The kids have a really important voice. And when you talk about like the social media companies having more of a responsibility, part of it might be having kids be part of the decision-making process. Like, let's have a seat on the board for 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds and encourage them to speak out, because, you know, they're speaking out about climate change. They're speaking out about some really big issues that are certainly bigger than sharenting, but these are issues too that they might want to speak out about. And so we should empower them to believe that their voice is worthy of being heard.
Why shouldn't they talk about their own rights?
Yeah.
They talk about climate. Why they shouldn't talk about them?
Right. And if we want to teach our kids to not share pictures of other people without their permission, if we want our teenage boys to know better than to take pictures of girls and share them inappropriately, there's a lot of ways that we teach that. We talk about it. We give them a good moral foundation, but we also show them that when we take a picture of them that they don't like, we're not posting it. We're modeling through our example. And so when we do that, when we start at a young age saying your image belongs to you, not somebody else, your image does not belong to me, we are empowering them to, it's almost like body awareness that we try to teach our kids in the brick and mortar world. You know, image awareness is important too. You own your image, and you have a responsibility to put forth a good image, but also to respect other people's rights to own their images.
I have one question that links perfectly to this that we're talking now. During this pandemic and quarantine, we have seen that in order to cope with all their duties, many parents have decided to give their kids a smartphone in order to keep them quiet. Public health experts here in Brazil have warned that boredom might actually be good for the kids. But we have witnessed that kids were missing their friends so much that they started to join apps like TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp, even before the age in which they would be allowed to do that, to share their routines. Most of them totally unsupervised. So they show, oh, I'm getting up, I've just gotten up, I'm eating breakfast, I'm doing this, this is my house, this is my parents, this is my dog, this is where I live. So they disclose so many information, sensitive information about themselves by their own hands. How can parents deal with that? Do you think that parents should give them this smartphones, or no? Let them enjoy their boredom.
So for that, I think a lot about what Professor Livingstone has talked about and Alicia Bloom-Ross, where we don't want to make it binary. It's not good or bad. Social media is not good or bad. It's part of our lives. It's probably here to stay. And so we have to develop, you know, ways to live with it, to use it safely. And so what I would say is that the first piece that I would tell parents is that we have to kind of step back and recognize and I'm talking about COVID-19 times, like 2020 right now, we have to take a step back and recognize that our kids do not have the ability to communicate with friends the way that they used to. And we are fortunate that there are tools like FaceTime to talk to grandparents right now. I mean, my kids love talking to their grandparents on FaceTime, and I'm so happy that they have that, because they wouldn't see their grandparents if it wasn't for that. So we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of good things that have come from this. Of course, FaceTime is a big leap to, Instagram or TikTok. So I think the next piece is really figuring out a safe, appropriate way to monitor, which we could talk for hours about too. Do you monitor, do you not? And I still have kids, so it's hard to talk as an expert when I'm still kind of living my own life experiment, right? So I don't always get it right.
A little biased.
Yeah. I'm trying my best. I fail often. I post and I delete. I mean, I fail at sharenting often. I delete things that I shouldn't post. I want to post things so badly that I, ask my friends and family if I should. That's why I'm saying it's a conversation. It's not a set of answers necessarily. But I think that with kids, if we can involve them in our own social media life, if we can think through how we share with them, like almost like show your math, like if you have a picture and you're deciding in your head, does that belong on social media or not? You don't just say to the child, no, that doesn't belong on social media. You weigh it back and forth in the same way that it's happening in your mind so that that child understands that critical thinking skill. I personally think that it's probably not a great idea to give kids apps that are, at the ages that, social media apps that are at the ages that aren't right for them. But I can think of a lot of reasons why parents would. And so I think that you have to look at your child and you have to decide what is your child capable of and how are you planning on supervising it? And then also, how are you planning on moving from supervision to taking off the guardrail or the training wheels? You also don't want a situation where you're so protective that your child turns 18 and all of a sudden it's the first time they sent a text that mom never saw. So, it's you have to find some sort of a push and pull in a gray area, and maybe accepting that what worked for one child, what worked for 1 year isn't going to work for another. I was against Facebook Kids probably a year ago. I wouldn't have given it to my kids. My kids have Facebook Kids now, So, I think that, it's the messenger for the kids to be able to communicate with each other. So I don't know. I think that asking the question is the best thing we can do, though, talking about it.
I'm asked the same question a lot. Even in my family, I have little cousins, and their moms usually ask me, "How should I give her the Instagram, or shouldn't I give her? Can I be in an account with her? How can I sort this out?" This is under development. It's something that we are still trying. We're still facing for the first time, so we don't have answers. We have many questions, but we don't have answers yet. We know we are almost getting to the end of our conversation. So if anybody has any more questions, please send them in. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Of course, I have many more, but due to the time that we have scheduled, from a legal perspective, do you think that sharenting could be seen as a damage? Does tort law and civil liability seems a good answer?
That's a great question. We have parental immunity is kind of a doctrine that's existed for a long time, and we're slowly chipping away at what parents are immune from. And what that means for the non-lawyers out there is that when kids become adults, that parents are in some ways immune from things that they did, decisions that they made when the kids were younger. But states are slowly chipping away at that doctrine in different ways that children might be able to sue their parents later on. And in other countries, I know for sure that children would have a remedy in tort or in civil law. So, it might be, I don't want it to come down yes or no, but I think it's definitely worth exploring, because if we use our civil liability system to figure out rights and wrongs, then it would seem fitting that this would be another place where being able to weigh the evidence without it being, the burdens of a criminal law, it might be a good place to look into. So I'd love to hear what your students have to say about that, and maybe they'll choose to write about that and share it with me.
Well, that's a great discussion here in Brazil as well. And some scholars say that, well, it is a damage, it won't be a damage. What would you ask when you sue a parent?
Yeah.
Would you ask for money? Would you ask for what? When would you do that?
Yeah, you would ask probably a takedown remedy, asking that.
Yeah, but as a child, how could you do that as a child?
Oh, yeah. I don't think so.
Have to wait until you're older.
Yeah, they might have to wait till they're older. Or maybe we get to a place where, it's like, certain women's rights, the right to, if a child is of a certain age in certain states, they can have a judicial bypass to get an abortion. Like there might be some sort of way that you have a judicial bypass mechanism that if your parent is doing something you don't like, that, if you're a mature, we call them mature minors here, if a child doesn't want to have medical care and they're 17 years old and they have a, really serious condition, there's a way for them to override their parents' wish for them to get chemotherapy or whatever the medical issue is. So, but you said the right word, damages. What are the damages? We know we need duty.
Psychological damages, maybe?
Yeah, psychological damages, maybe career damages. When we think about what technology could be in the future, like what if the information shared affects that person's ability to get health insurance one day, or to, run for public office, or, something like that. You might be able to frame it in a way. So I think it's a really good question, and the time to answer it is arriving.
Well, that's a very upcoming topic for us. We really should focus on that, because here in Brazil, it seems to me that the public ministry and the prosecutors, they can play an important role, as we've been talking. The Save Bell for Girls case, when you have an abuse, an extreme, something that's too much, the public ministry can go there and take it down. But the problem is, what about ordinary people? People who are being sharented and they're blind, they're totally blind, nobody can see them. They're invisible.
Yeah. Right.
That's something that really gets me.
Well, I'll go ahead, I'm sorry.
Please go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think that those cases that are invisible are really where the law can regulate those extreme cases, and the law kind of has to step in those extreme cases to help. So I think that's a really great point. Goodbye. It was nice to talk to you, Professor.
We have another question here. Last question, okay?
Okay.
What better way to deal? I'm going to put it there.
Sure. What better way to deal with parents of friends of their children who post photos of theirs? That's a great question. So I think you're talking about, like, if your friend is doing something that you know is probably not a very good idea for your friend to be doing, and you want to politely educate them that you might want to think twice about posting that. I think that it is really difficult to try to, it kind of comes back to the grandparent question too. Like, what if you see your child or you're doing something that you're not so keen on? I think that the best thing that you can do is you can help to talk to them, to share articles that are balanced. And if they're posting your own child's picture, if and that might be what you're getting at, is like, if my friend posts my child's picture, I think you have to maybe give them the benefit of the doubt at first, but be firm. That is your child, and you control that child's digital footprint until that child is old enough to take control of it themselves. We are like shepherds of our children's digital footprints. It's our job to guide them safely to adulthood, to protect them, to nurture them, so that when they come of age, they can take charge of it themselves. And so if a friend is posting something about your child that they shouldn't, I think that you start with a conversation. And if you have to get more firm, I think it's a balancing depending on how severe the infraction is. I don't think parents intrude on kids' digital footprints because they're being malicious. I think they do it because they haven't yet considered its importance. So if we're able to stress the importance, we can hopefully get people to move in the right direction without costly litigation. And that's what I'd probably say about that. And that's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
I've quoted exactly that saying of yours in one of my last articles, when you say that exactly that. I quoted it.
Oh yeah, it's one of my. There's a few.
They don't mean to cause harm. They do it because they don't know it.
Yeah. Parents do not intrude upon a child's digital footprint because they're being malicious. They just haven't yet considered its importance. And the other piece is that researchers like you and I are not out here trying to silence a parent's voice, because there is a lot of really good information that is shared. Being brave and being vulnerable, telling our own stories is really important. And we see that all the time. We see if somebody is taken advantage of, or if somebody, if somebody is having something that is unjust in society happening to them, and they are bold enough and brave enough to say, this horrible thing happened to me, and we should make sure it doesn't happen again. That requires a lot of bravery, but it also can result in social change. And so that applies with our kids too. When our kids go through something difficult, it's really hard to figure out whether or not to share it for the greater good of society, or whether or not to keep it private for our child. And these are the tough questions that I wish they gave us a manual when kids came. But I would love to come to Brazil when COVID is over. So thank you so much for saying that. It would be such an honor to be there with you in person.
Well, I can say that we are deeply honored to have you here. So Before I thank you for the last time, I'd like to ask you if you have any further comments, any final comments for us, so we can really come to an end.
I would just say to your students to see their careers as an opportunity, not just to climb a ladder or to make money, but to really find a way to make change. And I think that one of the best ways to make change is to find the things that you see as issues in your life and work from there. This topic was a genesis in self-reflection. It came from an issue I saw in my own life. And if you would have told me when I was in graduate school that I would be sitting here having an interview with you today about a topic and that you would say that I have expertise, I wouldn't have believed you.
And that you're famous in Brazil.
Thank you. You know, it took, as somebody, you know, who's been now almost 20 years practicing law, you know, it took a long time for me to own my originality and my authenticity. And so I would encourage your students to be who they are, bring their whole selves to their work. And I hope that they find a lot of joy.
Wow. What can I say about after that? Professor Steinberg, I can't thank you enough for your kindness. We are all delighted to hear from you. We really hope that you and your loved ones are doing well during this pandemic. And we all hope that we can meet in person as soon as possible. Please come to Brazil. We would be really happy and honored to welcome you here in Brazil when this nightmare is over.
I hope so. I would love to be there. Let's try to pick a day in 2021 and make it happen.
Let's hope it can happen.
Yes.
Oh, so I'll just address everybody, then we will close it. Então, pessoal, mais uma vez, muito obrigado pela presença de todos. Foi uma alegria imensa estar aqui recebendo a professora Stacey Steinberg, da Universidade da Flórida, e todos vocês. Muito obrigado pelas incríveis perguntas. Vamos tentar depois colocar a tradução desse vídeo e postar nas redes sociais. Então, a todos, muito obrigado e espero que todos fiquem bem durante esse período tão complicado da nossa pandemia. Thank you, Professor. We're just getting out right now.